The views are out of this world.
This thing is unbelievable. It sounds incredible.
Golly gee, everybody, look at that.
Welcome to a very special two-part episode of Drive TV. It's a crisp, foggy morning here in the nation's capital, and I'll tell you why in a minute. We are in Canberra, but there are two things behind me. One is the Ford Ranger, and I'll get to that in a second, and the other thing over there is Lake George on the outskirts of Canberra. Trust me, it is there. You can't see it through the fog. Now, why is the Ford Ranger here with us? Well, this is our reigning drive car of the year. Now, I get that it is not a car, and I get that some people have had a few issues with that. However, the top two selling vehicles in Australia over the last couple of years have been the Toyota Hilux and this, the Ford Ranger. And as part of our Drive Car of the Year judging, we make the choice based on the vehicle that moves the game forward the most in its segment for the most Australian new car buyers. And the new Ford Ranger is exactly that. Now, why are we here in the nation's capital? Well, bringing our reigning Drive Car of the Year to the capital of Australia makes a hell of a lot of sense. And we're going to show you over these two episodes that Canberra is not all about politicians, public servants and roundabouts. There's a lot going on down here, and we're going to show you some of it. Let's get into it. Who'd have thought when the Ranger, as we know it now, was first released, that some 15 years later or so, we would be here with our winner as the overall Drive Car of the Year. Now, dual cabs are a little bit divisive. Some of you love them. Clearly, a lot of you love them because this is one of the top-selling vehicles in Australia with the Toyota Hilux. Some of you don't like them. Well, Ford have got a solution for you. But before we get to that, one of the great things about the Ford Ranger and that other four-wheel drive over there behind me is the amount of Australian input that goes into them. And that's why we've decided to come and do this drive in the nation's capital. It is the Australian-developed Drive Car of the Year in the nation's capital. But if you don't like dual cabs, if you've got an issue with dual cabs, you'd rather not drive one, that's fine. Ford's solution comes in the form of the Everest, which is effectively this same platform in wagon form. It's going to make a lot of sense to a lot of family buyers. However, for these two special episodes and for Drive Car of the Year for this year, it's all about the Ford Ranger. The Ford Ranger covers a vast spread of models and variants, with the four-wheel drive models starting from $47,280 before on-road costs. The double cab wild track we're driving this week starts from $67,990 before on-road costs, and the range-topping Platinum V6 starts from $76,990 before on-road costs. The Ranger has an impressive spec sheet with the 3-litre V6 engine generating 184 kilowatts and 600 newton metres, driving through a 10-speed automatic as well as full-time four-wheel drive. For those of you keen on touring, Ranger Wildtrak will tow 3,500 kilograms and its claimed fuel use is 8.4 litres per 100 kilometres.
Like a bandit stealing time underneath the sycamore tree. Cupid by the all St. Valentine's to my sweet lover and me. Slowly but surely.
You might be wondering why we've come back to Canberra for another episode of Drive TV, and the quality and engagement of the driving roads is a big part of that. There's a lot to see here. There's a lot to do. It's a really interesting part of Australia with a lot of history, and we're showing you part of that on this week's episode, obviously, but it's also a really enjoyable place to drive. You can do what we've done this morning, and within 10 to 15 minutes, you're out of the centre of Canberra and you're driving on effectively country roads with no traffic, really good road surfaces, because of course, politicians like to be comfortable. So the roads in the nation's capital are very, very good, but there's not a lot of traffic on them either, especially once you get out of town. So no matter what sort of driving you're interested in, whether it's attacking a series of corners on a twisty country road, doing a little bit of off-road type stuff, heading out into national parks and doing a bit of exploring, there's a little bit of everything for you. And even if you just like a bit of relaxed country touring, like we're doing today on roads between 80 and 100 kilometres an hour, there are plenty of them in just about every direction out of Canberra, and there are fantastic little country towns at the end of those roads that you can go and visit as well, with their own little stories to tell. And it is a very, very enjoyable part of Australia to come and spend some time exploring. One of the main reasons the new Ford Ranger is our overall drive car of the year is something that you feel right here when you're sitting in the driver's seat. There's two factors that make a big difference to the Ranger package now than before, and probably than any other dual cab that's ever been on the market. Now let's start with the ride comfort. It's not perfect, and it has to be said that on choppy country B roads, you will feel those constant corrugations. You still feel them, but that's the case in any of the dual cabs, and it has to be said that the Ranger is far and away the best of the lot, and that's despite still having leaf springs against something like the Nissan Navara that has coils. So Ford has done a very, very good job of ironing out the ride as best it can for a vehicle that still needs to be able to carry hundreds of kilos in the tray. The second thing that makes a huge difference to the Ranger as a daily driver for the average punter in Australia is the cabin quality and the amenity. This has been put together more like a car, or certainly an SUV, than it has a dual cab. So things like, obviously, safety are taken care of, and we said for a long time that in the dual cab segment, safety was almost an afterthought. That's been taken care of, but crucially, comfort has as well. Seat comfort, seat design, choice of materials, trim, fit, finish, and that's before you get to things like the driver screens, the infotainment, the interactivity with your smartphone, the way that all that connectivity works, how easy it is to use, and then crucially, storage. That's the other big thing as well, because if you're buying one of these vehicles and you're going to use it day to day, you need effective storage that works. You've got cup holders that work. They work for bottle holders that are a little bit larger as well. Useful storage in the center console, door pockets that work also with bottle holders. So the real message here is that if you can afford a dual cab, and they're not cheap, and not every Australian can afford one, and we do keep getting reminded of that by readers and viewers who say, you can't really talk about these things as affordable when they're up at $80,000, and that is a fair point. But if you can afford a dual cab, yes, the Ranger is the best of them by some margin at the moment. It sets a whole bunch of new standards, but crucially, more than ever before, this is a vehicle that you can live with practically every day. Just outside the centre of Canberra City, there's a craftsman hard at work designing and creating something that isn't just incredibly complex, but is also world-class. In fact, his workshop is something you'd expect to find in a historic village in Switzerland. And we're here to visit one of Australia's true young artisan manufacturers. Well, you'd never expect it, but here in what I would call a regular suburb of Canberra, there's something that I'm particularly excited about, but something that I think you'll all appreciate going on. Reuben, you're joining me. Your surname, you pronounce it correctly, is Schoots, is that right? Yes.
That's right.
Thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about what you do here in what, from the outside, looks like a regular suburban garage in Canberra.
Sure. I make handmade watches. So mechanical watches,
Yep.
wrist watches, basically from the beginning phase all the way from design to machining the parts to finishing them to assembling.
You've told this story before, but tell our viewers who aren't aware of how you came to be at this point in handmade watchmaking. You were on holiday in South America. You got very sick. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was 22 when I travelled to South America. I was working in a cafe and I really still wasn't sure what I wanted to do with myself, and I thought, you know, a long travel would be, on the cards.
Which we all do at that age.
Yeah, it was a wonderful time, but unfortunately I was made sick 3 times when I was overseas. They believe malaria, Zika, and chikungunya virus. And then upon my return, my immune system collapsed. Lost my job, sold my car, and no social life, nothing. But it was during that time, I had so much time to think, what do I want to do? What do I want to be? If I get better, what would I like to do? And it was during that time that a good friend of mine, he's an engineer, he came around to my house and he was wearing a Seiko mechanical watch. I've always had an interest in cars growing up. I restored a 1961 Triumph TR4 with my father when I was a boy. And I remember looking into the mechanical watch movement and seeing a gear train, and I was like, oh, this is like a gearbox.
Yeah.
And I saw a real opportunity there that this was something I could do. I was less physically able, but perhaps I could just sit down and play with watches. And then I spoke with my wife, and basically we had a conversation, and I said I'd like to order all of the tools and machines to begin making watches.
Did she think you were crazy?
She was so supportive, which I couldn't believe. I remember trying to think about how am I going to pitch this to my friends, my family, my wife. But no, received great support from the beginning, and I ordered the bare minimum tooling and machinery with the small amount of money we could bring together. And I began making a watch.
You touched on it. I want to ask you a couple of specific questions about your watches in a minute, but you touched on your love of cars. We've been talking this morning about the fact that if you're into the mechanics of cars, you tend to be really interested in watches and anything with mechanical parts and a drivetrain and componentry that moves and works. Can you tell us a little bit about how that started, your interest in the mechanical part of cars?
My father taught me to drive when I was 5 or 6 years old. We used to go out into the Brindamilla Mountains just out here and drive around. And then, the process of rebuilding that Triumph, that was a real eye-opening thing for me as a young man. What began as just a pile of scrap, and it was a full rebuild the engine. Every single part was taken to pieces, and for me it was like magic when we first started that car and then drove it around.
Yeah.
And that was an incredible experience. And then as I got older and I got my license, I wanted to get a car, and of course the first thing I wanted to do was to make it go faster. Being of the generation that I am, I got really heavily into 1990s Japanese turbo sports cars. Just modifying them, driving them fast, and having fun with them.
Now, back to the watches, which is what we're here to talk about. Your Series 1 watches are sold. They've gone. You've made 6 of those, and they've gone off into the world, into the hands of new owners. I believe you're at the prototype stage still of Series 2. Are you just about to start production of Series 2? Explain a little bit about where you are there.
Yeah, so production of Series 2 has begun. As I'm going, I'm assembling a prototype movement, which is essentially just to double check and make sure that things are okay as I progress. But production has begun, so the design phase and the programming phase has been completed, and roughly 1 month ago now, I began the machining process, which is from making from raw materials, machining all of the different components inside the movement.
One of the things that is really noteworthy with New Ranger is the engine and transmission, and not just the numbers on paper, which we talk about a lot, but the relationship between the two. So you've got an excellent turbo diesel V6 engine up front, and you've got a very, very accomplished 10-speed automatic transmission mated to it. And that makes a really big difference, because what that allows the engine to do is perform at its best thanks to the way that the gearbox works with it. Makes for a very, very comfortable ride. It's efficient as well. We're using in the single digits out on the open road, so you'll use well below 10 litres per 100. But I think the key is the gearbox allows the engine to make the most of its power and torque. It's smooth, it's snappy, gearbox shifts quickly too, and this is all around an enjoyable driving experience. If you've ever done the road trip between Sydney and Melbourne, as I did when I was a child, you'll remember the old Hume Highway and the beautiful old pub that sits on the side of the road in a town called Jugiong. The town is bypassed by the freeway now, but that beautiful old hotel has had a complete rebuild and is now a must-stop destination for not just a meal and a cold beverage, but some fantastic boutique accommodation as well. Leonie is the General Manager here at the Sir George. Leonie, first of all, this is an amazing old building. Old pubs often are, but this is a particularly special one. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of this building?
Well, it was built back in 1854 and it operated like a roadhouse. You know, it was the centre of everything. More recently, it kind of fell into ruin and some beautiful people, Liz and Kate, bought this pub, and about 8 years ago they did a total refurb on it. They put up some amazing accommodation.
Yeah.
But the most impressive thing they've done here is the gardens.
Yeah.
They've just kind of planted green on green. It's absolutely beautiful.
We'll get to the accommodation in a minute, but I remember as a kid, definitely, and we spoke about this off camera before, coming down the hill, because this was obviously the old Hume Highway. And I remember coming down the hill and this building was here. You'd stop in to have a drink on your way back to Sydney.
Yep.
Obviously, the trip was a lot longer. But people who pass by on the bypass will maybe remember in the back of their mind that this used to be a focal point of going from Sydney to Melbourne.
Absolutely. Everybody remembers the Jugiong Hill because they all broke down there. And all the trucks broke down there.
Yeah.
And the highway went straight past our front door. It was a great place for a schooner for the next leg of your trip and the next breakdown of your trip.
Now, I noticed out there before, and I'm thinking I might steal one on the way out, there is some amazing looking bread out there.
Absolutely.
Which I wasn't aware of when I came. So tell us a little bit about that.
So, well, it was started by the previous owners of the pub and it was a great idea. So we have a bakery which is in a separate building and we're making our own sourdoughs, which are traditionally made sourdoughs that take 2 days to make. We have the best homemade donuts ever, which no matter how many we make, get sold out every single day.
I noticed they're gone. We got here just after lunch today and they're all gone.
Well, you missed them by about 2 hours.
Oh, good. Yeah, great.
Yeah, so our breads are fantastic. Our olive breads, you know, we use whole olives in there and a couple of different types of olives. Our fruit loaf has got whole figs in it and cranberries and everything. It's amazing. Again, we get people here all the time going, we just stopped in for your fruit loaf.
Wow.
You know, so people are getting to know it.
Now, you mentioned the accommodation there. You do have the old stables and there's some, you can find out online, what it all looks like.
Online.
And, yeah, that's right. So the stables are a fantastic old building that you've converted, and then you do have the individual little barn-style accommodation. That came during the refit of the building, is that right?
Yeah, the refurbishment is when they built those. I wish they'd built another 10. It's probably something.
I want a booking this Friday night. How am I going to go?
Yeah, there's no chance. There's just no chance. You really have to book advance for Friday and Saturday nights, and I'd happily see more people on a Tuesday night, but yeah, the accommodation is just beautiful.
One of the things you can do really easily if you use Canberra as your centre, as we've done for this road trip, is you can come up with a whole bunch of places to visit heading in just about any direction. So if you look at it on a map, you've got the centre of Canberra right in the centre of that map. You can then go out like spokes on a bicycle wheel and go and visit a whole lot of country towns around the centre of Canberra. However, if you look at what we're doing on a map over the next 2 episodes, what we're effectively going to complete is a big ring around Canberra, starting up around Lake George where you would drive in from the Sydney side. We're going to visit places like Jugiong, and then we're going to drive down through the Brindabella Ranges and loop right back around to Braidwood in New South Wales. So basically, if you look at what we're doing on a map, it's a big circle using Canberra as the centre point. You can stay wherever you like. We're staying in the centre of Canberra for this one because then there's all the restaurants and coffee shops and bars and all the things that you can do, as well as museums, obviously, when you're visiting Canberra specifically. But don't forget the country towns as well. I just mentioned a place like Braidwood. Don't forget that there's plenty of fantastic places to stay there as well. So head out into the country towns, spend a bit of money, get to know some of the locals and enjoy some of the history that they've got to offer.
Like a heart needs a beat, but it's nothing new.
This week we started our drive on the shores of Lake George, having driven down from Sydney. The run across to Jugiong starts on Murrum Bateman Road and takes around an hour and a half. You'll pass a number of the local vineyards and skirt around the town of Yass. From Yass, it's an easy run down the Hume until you take the exit to Jugiong. On your drive back to Canberra City, divert off the Hume at the town of Murrumbateman and take the Barton Highway before turning onto Gungahlin Drive toward Mount Stromlo. Next week, we continue our loop around the nation's capital in our reigning Drive Car of the Year to explore more of Canberra's artisan spirit.